Well, we've got this webinar that we're doing from here at noon today. Yeah, so I'm gotta look good. All right, good morning, everyone. Hello. Every week when I go to look at the video after class, I see at the beginning, I set it up and then I see my backside, coming around. And so I need to figure out how to put that like on a time delay or something. So that, yeah. Okay, is it me or is it like super hot in here? Okay. Oh, seriously?
I'm very cold.
It is so hot. I like the Easter Sunday when we were in the chapel. I don't know if you noticed, I had completely sweat through my shirt by the end of that. It was so hot in there. Say what? Oh, it went the wrong way? Thank you. Too late. I dried out by the end of Easter service, but
did you get to keep your own seat that Sunday?
I did. I just decided I was going to sit down and not worry about anyone else this year. Yeah, we seem to make it. I don't know. I was too responsible the year before, like former staff member trying to make sure everyone got a seat. And this year I decided not my job. I don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to keep my seat. So, just a reminder that today, right after the service, you're invited to come to Community Hall. This is why I'm wearing a tie today, and have a jacket here that's too hot in this room to put on. But we're doing a B&G webinar that's also a church-wide conversation. Timothy and I will be having a dialogue with Robert P. Jones, also known as Robbie, and Greg Garrett, who many of y'all know. Greg's preaching this morning. We had some of y'all were at the thing yesterday, and
well, I hope I can hear better today. I didn't understand a thing that Jones said.
It was hard in the sanctuary to hear yesterday. That's correct. Yeah. Again, not my responsibility anymore, but it is a problem.
I watched it remotely and it was wonderful.
Okay, good. Well, I was getting a text message from someone during the beginning of it saying, "Can you just do something about the sound? We can't hear." And I'm like, not my responsibility anymore. But I happened to be sitting right behind Jerry McKenzie, and I just handed her my phone and said,
Very good. Here, Jerry.
so I'm trying to work through my boundaries. It's hard. It's hard. Well, they finally moved it to, they changed, it got better, I thought, as it went. It was very difficult at the beginning. Anyhow, that was live streamed, so it should be online. And then today it's going to be live streamed by B&G. And y'all, these are two of the foremost scholars in America today on the issue of race and the church among white people. And so it's a great opportunity. I mean, Robbie Jones is the definitive go on TV spokesperson about data on this. Ann?
Well, and I told him yesterday when I went by to get his book that back in the early 60s when integration was just getting started, I was on the staff. And so on the staff meeting one day, somebody said to Bruce, one of the ushers came to me today and wanted to know what they were to do if blacks came in. And Bruce said, you will seek them like you seek anybody else. So our acceptance goes way back.
So for those of you not hearing this, one of the things that was mentioned in the conversation yesterday was about an attempt to integrate churches in 1963 that was met with resistance. I mean, there's famous stories at First Baptist Atlanta, for example, where they had deacons stationed at the front doors, and it was like it became a big issue, right? Trying to keep black people out, right? Same thing happened at Robbie Jones's church, where he had grown up. The history there, it turns out one of his, his great-grandfather? His grandfather. His grandfather was one of those deacons assigned to keep non-white people out of the church. And he was shocked to learn this, right? here's the truth that is no one wants to hear. Every white church in America has a history of racism we do not know. Even ours. Now, yes.
When I was 5, living in Dallas, my dad would get death threats on the phone because he proposed integration. This was before we moved to Nashville. But I mean, he never talked about it. I think I heard that from someone else.
In the 50s.
In like 1960.
1960, yeah. Yeah, her father, Foy Valentine, who was head of the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission and then the SBC Christian Life Commission, getting death threats. But, so great story from Ann about Bruce McKeever, our beloved former pastor, who said, to deacons, you seat anyone who comes. And that's not what was happening across America. There is, there is a story about our founding that needs some double checking as well. And that's a lesson for another day that I don't have time to get into today. But the point they were trying to make yesterday is it is inherent in the white church in America that there's a history of racism. We've just got to own up to it, right? Because it is so second nature to us that we just don't even recognize it. Yeah.
Don't they say that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour?
So this is the famous Martin Luther King statement that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most racially segregated hour in America. Now, he said that in the 60s, and, I like MLK, and I think he's brilliant, but that may have been like hyperbole, because in those days, everything was segregated, right? And one of the other things about this that is so difficult is there are a lot of good-hearted people who want integration but are not willing to change culture. So there is a reason 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is still, by and large, a highly segregated time in churches. And it has not to do with racism so much as it has to do with culture. So this is a great segue to where I want to go today. Yes,
Can I completely sidetrack that?
briefly.
Anybody that has a PBS passport, you can watch on American Masters right now a stunning biography of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and the Moynihan Report is a big part of it.
Okay.
That is all about not only the church part, but just racism in America and causes and what he wanted to do about it. And NLBJ did so much, but could only go so far. It's fascinating.
So, Jim.
Yes, would you spell out for us the relationship between culture and racism?
Okay, now we just moved into a doctoral seminar. I want to answer that by telling a story. Okay? Call me Jesus. Yeah. I'm going to tell you a parable. And y'all know sometimes I use this class to work out what I'm writing about as well. And so you're going to see this pop up somewhere later. But this actually occurred to me yesterday during yoga before I came to this. I was over at yoga before, and I ate lunch over here and sat down and started doing some writing.
Nobody put the mat in front of
No, there were not enough people to mess with me yesterday. Yeah. So, anybody read People magazine? You can admit it. It's okay. You've been to a doctor's office. You've seen People magazine. All right. There's this long recurring feature in People magazine that the headline is, "The stars, they're just like us." Have you seen this? Yeah. So it's a photo feature, and it's in every issue. Now, I haven't seen every issue, but every issue I've ever seen, it's in. And the stars, they're just like us, is like paparazzi photos of A-list celebrities doing ordinary things, like grocery shopping, or picking up stuff from the cleaners, or going to the pharmacy, or, and the point of this is they're trying to help the average American believe that the above average celebrity does the same things we do, that they're just like us. And what that does is makes us the center of the story. Okay? It makes our experience, it implies that the readers of People magazine, who are not celebrities, not the stars, I'm sure the stars read it too, but that the average person, we are the norm, right? And here is an application in this, directly to Jim's question. The piece I'm writing is off on one segment of this, and the headline of this piece is going to be, "The gays, they're just like us." And one of the problems with well-meaning Christian people who want to be inclusive is we justify inclusion by saying, well, they're just like us. Well, it's like saying the blacks, they're just like us. The Asians, they're just like us. The poor, they're just like us. The rich, they're just like us. The Canadians, they're just like us, right? It is this attempt to homogenize everything, to homogenize so that our life experience becomes the norm for everything. And that is immensely dangerous. So one of the things I'm going to say in this piece is I'm going to quote that story from Acts chapter 10, where Peter, has the vision and he's trying to decide, whether the Gentiles can be in the church or not. And the whole book of Acts is really our best biblical model for equality and inclusion on every front, because the early church is dealing with this issue of who can be in, right? And this sheet comes from heaven with all of these unclean Jewish dietary law, unclean animals, and the voice from heaven says to Peter, "Kill and eat." Now that's a little bit brutal, but that's the day when you had to kill your own food. All right. We're not used to that. We let other people do that for us now. So Peter has this vision that he comes around to say, I now understand, when he interprets it to his fellows later, I now understand that God is no respecter of persons out of this. And here's the point I want to say. When Peter has this vision and all this unclean food comes down, the voice from heaven does not say, it all tastes like chicken. I thought that was a pretty good line. Thank you for laughing, right? Because what we're used to doing to justify trying new foods is to say, well, it tastes like something we already know, right? Because we cannot get out of our comfort zone to experience something that is not, we've got to describe it in terms of what we know. It's got to be just like us, right? And so and when there has been a white majority in America, we, white Christian people, this is what all the culture wars are about pretty much right now, if you boil it all down, right? We have lost our majority and we don't get to dictate things anymore because the just like us used to be us. So Robbie Jones yesterday quoted a statistic that maybe he'll quote again today about how from the time he started writing his first book, which was 10 years ago, to today, the white majority in the United States has gone from 52% to 40%. 52% to 40%. No wonder there's a revolution, right? It's what we call blacklash. But it's not just black, it's brown lash too. And it's Asian lash and all of this. Carol Ann.
They say that by the year 2034, something like that.
Right.
That the majority is going to be brown.
So you hear lots we'll ask Robbie about that today because he knows the numbers on this. here's the deal. We've known for several decades this was going to happen. This is not like a surprise to anyone who's been listening, right? Because of population trends, because of birth rates, white people are having fewer babies, brown people are having more babies, right? And this is why immigration is such a big issue, because it's threatening our way of life. Well, you can just take that same argument and put it on the plantation, because getting rid of slavery threatens our way of life, right? And this is not only an American problem. You can go to multiple countries in the world where just like us means something that's not us. Everyone in this room would be an outlier there, right? Because their majority perception is something different. So all of this is introduction to the great theme of the Bible I want to talk about today. And I chose this because it connects with the weekend's theme. And that is, where do we find a biblical basis for equity and equality? Where do we find a biblical basis for equality? And I'm not just talking about LGBTQ equality. I'm not just talking about gender equality. I'm talking about all equality. So that we don't have to say it tastes like chicken, right? That we can understand this. So I wrote a story this past week about this man who works in a big factory in Iowa. It's part of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and his company observes Pride Week or Pride Month, and they send out typical messages, and they're using the rainbow flag, and this guy is like a bivocational preacher, and he was very upset because his claim is that his company is violating his religious beliefs by co-opting the rainbow to be something other than God's sign in the sky. So what's the problem with this? It's all about him. It's not about anyone else. It's about protecting his view of the way he thinks things ought to be. And he's one little employee in this multinational corporation, right? But this is how white privilege works, right? Because we protest because it's not like us, These other employees, they're not just like us in this regard. And they're taking a religious symbol. Well, again, I refer you to Peter and the sheet of animals. We could say that was original, what do you call that? Sheet baking? Sheet meal? Yeah. Sheet pan. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that didn't work so well. I gotta work on that line a little bit more. Yeah. But how do we get here? Because there's one big problem in the Bible. Well, there's multiple big problems in the Bible, but there's one big one related to this. The entire story of the children of Israel in the Old Testament is about separation. It is about God calling out the children of Israel to be separate from all the other nations. That sounds a whole lot like segregation. And we got to come to grips with this, because that also is the basis for some people's argument for segregation. Again, not just with black-white, but with all levels of things, right? It's fine to have an Asian church over here, but let's not have that here, right? It's fine to have a black church in South Dallas, but let's not have it here, right? One of the things that Greg Garrett talked about yesterday was that we've got to understand, how is it that our church is located right here where it is and not somewhere else in Dallas? What happened geographically to cause this to happen, right? Well, there are multiple historical factors to that also include segregation and redlining and all of these things, right? And if you think this is an ancient problem, I was talking to someone this week who works for a bank, a big bank, who was just furious because the head of this bank had put out an internal email saying, we've got to get more black loans, y'all. But don't give them just to any black people, because they're going to be risky. This is 2024, y'all. This is not 1964. And this attitude still exists in business today. We are not as far removed from this as you think, right? We had a lovely woman who stood up at the end of the session yesterday, a black woman, older woman, who stood up and talked about how her children have lived a life so much better than hers because they were able to go to integrated schools and all the opportunities they've had. And yet, the discrimination they face in the workplace today as professional people is no different than what she experienced. And it's a matter of perspective, because we see what we want to see because we want to believe everyone else is just like us, right? Just like us. Well, the Bible has not helped us in this regard. By one perspective, I want to get around to give you a helpful perspective to get out of this at the end. But if you read the Old Testament story, God is calling out the children of Israel to be distinct from the other nations. Well, why is this? The most generous answer I can give is that God is wanting to call them to be an example to the nations. And instead of becoming an example, they become a cult. And this is what often happens, even in the Christian church as well, where we get so removed in our desire for purity, doctrinal, racial, political, whatever, we want to be with people who are, here's that line again, just like us. One of the most destructive ideologies that happened in American Christianity in the late 20th century is something called the homogeneous church growth principle. And I heard this taught when I was from early journalist days through. This was the idea, and it's not wrong, it's just not right, okay? This was the idea that the way to grow, to plant new churches and to grow them is to find an example of the kind of person you want to reach and build everything around that model. So, y'all, I love Rick Warren, all right? He's a friend. He's done tremendous things at Saddleback. But the way Saddleback began was they had two idealized people, Saddleback Sam and Saddleback Sally, that they were the prototype of the kind of person they were trying to reach in Southern California. Now, over time, they've grown well beyond that. And Saddleback is a beautifully diverse church, and major kudos to them, right? But the problem was that model got picked up by other people as well. Willow Creek in Chicago had the same thing, where they're trying to find someone who's just like us, because we know that birds of a feather flock together. And so what the church lost in the 20th century, leading into the 21st, was the ability to model something other than just like us, because we became the purveyors of just like us. Now, you can go back to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, first 5 books of the Bible, and the whole story, and you can make a case for this, because God calls the children of Israel out from this. But how do we get over that? Yes?
Well, as we've talked about before, were the children of Israel really the chosen people? Or is that
reverse engineering?
from
Well, we don't know the answer to that, right? But we can see a lot of damage that's been done from it as well, right? Carol Ann?
I was wondering if it wasn't to keep them from being, quote unquote, polluted by the religions and the cults of the other nations. I know I'm being...
No, that's exactly, so this is part of it, because you have these polytheistic religions, you have these paganism all around, and again, the most generous read I can give on the story is God is leading them to establish the beginnings of what becomes our faith today, right? A monotheistic religion. And they're to be an example into this. So the idea of being an example, I think, is that you ought to bring other people into your example rather than keep people out of your example, right? What this became was a wall instead of a door. It became a barrier instead of an invitation in. But here's the antidote to all of this, because throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, it is also a story of inclusion and equality. It's just that we ignore that stuff. I'm going to read some Bible verses to you in just a moment that are not new Bible verses. They've been there from the beginning. And slave owners in the American South, if they had a Bible, they could have read them, right? But they justified them in different ways. They qualified them in different ways. And usually the way you take these Bible verses on equality and inclusion from the Bible is you say, well, you know, that's not really talking about everybody. That's talking about us. And I hear this a lot when we're interpreting New Testament passages. I hear conservative biblical scholars say, well, that's really about the church. It's only about the church. Well, I'm sorry. I don't find anywhere in the Bible that it says, love only people in the church. But this is the idea that they want to get to, is that thing about love your neighbor as yourself, that's only about people in the church, right? Well, go back and read the original story. There's no hint of that there. But we make excuses for these things, right? So from that story of Peter and the sheet of animals as sort of being the high tent pole of this, we can start in Genesis. We can actually start in Genesis, where God creates humanity. Now, remember, Genesis is not to be read literally. It is not a literal history of creation because no one was there to witness it. Week before last, I was driving from Austin back through Waco to Dallas, and I may have mentioned this, the radio dial in Central Texas has a lot of preaching on it. And I caught this guy who was preaching. I didn't stay long, but this was the week before the eclipse, right? And he was preaching from Revelation about the eclipse. And his beginning statement was, now, everything in the book of Revelation is to be read literally. And I knew we had a problem right there. But I want to hear what he's going to say. Well, he went from there to explain the eclipse. And by the way, we're all still here. No one got raptured. I don't think so, unless it's secret, right? The book of Genesis is also not to be read literally. I've said multiple times, Genesis is the story of God's love for us. It is the story of why God created, not how God created. So, but we want to make it a science textbook when it's not. But even so, there's two creation stories, as you know, and one of them puts more emphasis on God creating male and female than the other does. But there is nowhere in the creation story that it says God created some people to be black and brown and white and whatever, rich, poor, none of that stuff, right? From the beginning, God's intent is for humanity to be the same, that God creates and approves of everyone. Now, some of our twisted biblical scholars, I'm going to use that term lightly here, move forward. We've talked before about the curse of Ham, which is baloney, but how there came to be different races, and then you get to the Tower of Babel, and that sort of becomes the thing that God confused everything, and if you're going to make that case, you're going to have to go back and explain to me how the sons of Adam and Eve found wives, because these are equally vexing problems, right? If you're going to read the Old Testament literally, we got some talking to do about some gaps in the story, right? But the point is, from the beginning, even with what we have in Genesis, it does not indicate any class. It does not indicate any difference between people, right? And as we move forward, even through the Psalms, even through the prophets, and especially into the New Testament, we find verse after verse after verse that echoes this line that Peter gives, I now understand that God is no respecter of persons. All right, so let's hit some Bible before we run out of time, because all we're hearing is me yak right now. Deuteronomy chapter 10. And sorry, I'm too lazy to put out a sheet right now. Like I got a really good start the first few weeks of this series, and then I just fell down. Deuteronomy chapter 10. Okay, early Old Testament. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. Who shows no partiality. Genesis 1:27. So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Again, I explained that already, right? I'm trying to get to Old Testament verses before I get to Proverbs. The Proverbs of Solomon, chapter 22, verse 2. Rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Well, there's some wisdom in that, right? Psalm 67:4. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. Pretty clear, right? Malachi, still in the Old Testament, chapter 2, verse 10. Do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us? Why do we profane the covenant of our ancestors by being unfaithful to one another? Now, you should have been able to preach this to a slaveholder in the American South, and they should have rededicated their lives right then. Because it is, I think that's pretty clear, right? But how do we justify this? We justify it by saying it has limits. Because some of those people, whoever those people are, they're not just like us. And therefore, they're not included in this. Leviticus 19, 33 and 34. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. One of the things that drives me the most insane in America right now is immigrants who don't want any more immigrants. All right? It's sort of this, I got mine, phooey on you, right? I do not understand the mentality, right? It's easy for me to throw stones at that, but we who are, well, I mean, we're all immigrants in a way, right? All of us. I mean, I've traced my own family history and it's sorted, right? I don't know if I told you the story before or not, but one of my earliest ancestors in America, well, the earliest ancestor, Wingfield ancestor in America, was the first president of the Jamestown colony. He was on the boat that came over to settle Jamestown. And he was the only investor who came on the trip, and they had a sealed envelope from the investment company in England, the Jamestown Corporation, that only when they spotted land were they able to open the envelope, and they were told who the officers of the new place would be, whatever they created, the town. And Edward Moriah Wingfield, there's a plaque to him in the chapel at Jamestown. He was to be president. Well, he and John Smith didn't get along. And my great whatever, right, ended up getting run out of town on a rail because of him and John Smith, right? But by the way, they chose a horrible place. You know, that whole story there. All of us are immigrants here. But again, we're able to say, well, you're not like me. because we get enough time, we get enough distance in that as well. I'm looking for other Old Testament passages here. I should have organized my list better. Let's go to the New Testament. That's enough of the Old Testament on this. Hebrews 12:14. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Here, this is so rich you can get a whole sermon out of it, right? It is equating living in peace with other people to holiness. And the problem with so much of American Christianity is we think holiness is separation. But here, this passage is telling us holiness is about integration, not separation. It is learning to live with other people. 1 John 2:2. We should have like a Bible drill now. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. The whole world, everybody. Ephesians 5:21. Oh, Ephesians 5. Anyone know this chapter? You know, this is the wives submit to your husbands passage. Okay? So if you're going to buy that line, wait till you get to this one. Same chapter. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Never hear about that one.
We never talk about that one, right? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups, in this case, Jews and Gentiles, one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. There is no way you can use the Bible, even a special Americanized $59.99 edition, to make a case that God teaches us to build walls and keep people out. Yes, order matters, but the principle of the Bible is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And as we saw during the pandemic, a lot of evangelical preachers, John MacArthur, Exhibit A, twist that verse and honest to God do not believe it. Because their ability to worship with people who are just like us, who all got COVID together, by the way, supersedes Jesus' command to love your neighbor as yourself. So you're taking some passages of the Bible and you're elevating them above others. But the problem with love your neighbor as yourself is it came from Jesus. All right. Let's see. I got a couple more and then we'll talk about these. John chapter 13, verse 34. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Is there any example you can find in the New Testament of Jesus excluding someone from God's love? It's not there. Jesus got in trouble because he included people in God's love who were not just like us. They wouldn't have made People magazine, right? Mark tells us, when Jesus answers this question about love your neighbor as yourself, he says that love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind, and then love your neighbor. Jesus says, we forget this part too, there is no commandment greater than these. I mean, no commandment greater. And yet we're going to devalue that in some way. And here is, I think, the root of the whole problem. From that beautiful second chapter of Philippians, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. If there is any passage American Christianity has gotten away from in our lifetime, it is this idea that we demonstrate the love of God by valuing other people more than ourselves. remember the teaching of Jesus in his parable of the banquet, where he says, when you're invited to a banquet, go take the lowest seat at the table, because it's better to be invited to a seat of honor than to put yourself in a seat of honor and be moved to the end of the table. The whole notion of this is not to see ourselves as the center of the story, but to be always questioning where we fit into God's story. Do you see the difference? And racism in America, sexism in America, all of the ancillaries to that are rooted in this idea that I am the center of the story. And that is always ripe for abuse. Okay, I've talked a lot. Let's hear from you. How does this strike you? And maybe you've got some other verses you'd like to throw at me as well. Thoughts, comments? Anyone? Jim?
One thing that came out yesterday in the session was that we need to become honest about our history.
Yes.
And you were talking about we're all immigrants,
Right.
and yet we forget about that.
Right, because it's so distant to us, right?
And we're against immigrants coming here. And I just thought that was an enormous, huge statement they were making. History, if we go back in history, like you were doing with your ancestors,
Right.
we can learn a whole lot about why we're the way we are today.
That's right.
And we're not healthy today. And to understand our state of health, we need to go back and see what set us up to be who we are.
Yeah, so before we get to Nancy's, I refer you, as always, to A Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams, great American drama, where we're like Blanche DuBois. We're putting up rose-colored shades to make our lives look better than they really are. The great American classic. Nancy?
Another disturbing idea that I heard yesterday that was new to me is that how church-sponsored segregation is. Going back to 1493.
Yes.
When Columbus got an edict from the Pope that it was okay to subjugate these people.
Yeah, this was I'd never heard this story either.
I hadn't either.
1493, right? Columbus gets an edict from the Pope that gives him the right to segregate and to subjugate certain people from the Pope. Well, I mean, those days, right? That was not Pope Francis. Different era.
Before the Reformation, everybody was.
Yeah, this was before the Reformation. Yes.
So much of this, the Pope in 1493, plantation owners in the South, that gets down to, I might think better of this person if I didn't need him to go pick my cotton.
Right.
It's economic.
Well, so, I used to believe this, and I think this was a motivation at some point, but we have gotten to the point today where economics be damned because we are turning away the people who do the jobs we don't want to do, and the American economy, y'all, is going to collapse without immigrants. The business people are saying over and over again, and they're being shut out, we cannot do our work without immigrant labor. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's just the reality. And if you're against immigration today, you're against the American economy. And, most of us grew up in a time in which conservatism meant being pro-business. But now we're just mean. We're just mean. Yeah, Ann?
Well, I was able to find my great-great-great-great-grandfather's will back in South Carolina, 1787 or something.
Wow.
Anyway, enlists his slaves and who he gave them to. And then many years ago, I came in contact with a black woman whose name was my maiden name, personally. And I thought to myself, she probably descends from my great grandfathers, slaves.
But most people have no idea of any of this, right? Because the truth is we don't want to know. Most of us just don't want to know, right? And that's back to Jim's point as well. I want you to think about how we read the Bible to justify our own biases. I just gave you a whole series of verses, as I mentioned before, that have always been in the Bible from the time we had the Bible. They are not modern inventions to go back and make the Bible woke, right? They've been there all along. But we overlook them in favor of other things that make our case. And the problem with the Bible is if you're going to say, I believe the Bible, you're going to have to believe all the Bible.
But I mean, it just makes me think of Thomas Jefferson, didn't he?
He
Have his own Bible.
Well, Thomas Jefferson cut parts of the Bible out. Yeah, he made his own Bible. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it. It's on display. And I mean, it's hysterical, right? He just snipped out the parts he didn't like, right? Yeah, I've often joked that, we have a red letter edition Bible. I want to have a black letter edition where I take a black Sharpie and just mark out the parts I don't like Jefferson, just that way I don't have to read them. And that's what we effectively have done, right? This is what we have done. What else? Yes.
Well, one thing that still bothers me when I was growing up, two things. The Bible said, do not be unequally yoked.
Okay.
That was a big one.
Yes.
And the other thing is my mother, my family still does the world. It's us against the world. Don't do worldly things. Don't listen to worldly music. Don't.
Yes.
The thing is other. The world and us. That's really cemented in their mindset. And it's like, they don't really do movies. They really don't do modern music.
Yeah.
And it's bothered me my whole life because I love the world.
So this idea of worldliness is well rooted in the New Testament. We are admonished in the New Testament to be separate from the world, right? And this crowd sort of goes to see it on that, right? Go see the movie Footloose. That's a good example of this as well. And again, here's taking a teaching of the Bible to the exclusion of the whole of the Bible, right? And sorry to keep quoting Footloose here, but it almost is a great sermon in it because what's his name's father? Who's the actor in that? Yeah, his father is a pastor, right? Who's a very narrow-minded pastor who needs to be woke, I guess in a sense, right? He needs to see how narrow he is and how he's expelling people rather than bringing people in, right? The answer to this, I think, is when the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, and now I will show you a more excellent way. A more excellent way. I think is that 1 Corinthians 13? Yes. Yeah. And that is the way of love. Yes, you can cherry pick the Bible to make a case for exclusion and for avoiding worldliness, right? But the problem with worldliness is who gets to define what's worldly. That list has been ever changing. Everyone in this room's lived long enough to have seen us go through multiple iterations of that where, blue laws were to avoid worldliness, right? But it's funny how that never applied to the cafeteria on Sunday. I wrote about that this week too.
And dancing.
And in some places, right? Yeah, like, in the truly devout. And y'all, there are folks who live like this today. And there are places in America where these exclusionists are working to take over city governments and states and to impose their morality on everyone around them. And this is the model for what they want to do to America. So when you hear us talk about Christian nationalism, which is like every other breath today, and I know you get tired of it, this is what's happening, is this merging of strict moralization, right, with government and public life. And we do not live in a theocracy. We do not live in a theocracy. Okay, who else had a comment or a question?
Well,
Yeah.
my understanding is we can look at wherever we are, whatever we're thinking. Are we coming from fear or are we coming from love?
Yes.
And if you look at it that way, all the stuff that's going on, they are coming from fear. Either fear of change or fear of what these people might be like, that kind of thing. But to me, that just makes it so much easier to reconcile it for myself. Am I coming from love or am I coming from fear?
So this is a brilliant insight, and this really cuts to the core of the problem. And this is difficult because some of us have been raised to be fearful of everything. Some of us, by personality, are fearful of everything. Some of us, not me, but some of us, for good reason, have innate fear about things because maybe we've come from instability. Maybe we've come from abuse. Maybe we've come from poverty. Maybe we've come from some area where we had to grow up to be fearful about things. This is an interesting area where Allison and I often see the world differently because she's much more suspicious of things than I am, right? Yeah. And we've come from not that dissimilar, a place, right? Oh, it's late. Sorry. We just got, wound up. But where you've come from shapes how you see the world, right? And some of us are too trusting, and others of us are too, I want to think the best of everyone. And there's a danger in that too, right? But this is a brilliant insight. Okay. Great discussion. Thanks for that. So a great theme of the Bible is inclusion. It's equality. God created all people, equal of God's love and equal to our love as well. That is a great theme we find in the Bible. Let's pray together. Thank you, God, for the witness of your love for us and for the way you've made us. We pray you'd help us to see you at work in the world around us everywhere and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.